Okay, hello everyone. Be ready to start in just a moment. Making sure everything's working. Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Okay, this will be the last in the series that the current series I'm doing on the aggregates, and is probably the most important one. It's the aggregate of Vinnāna. So far, we've had the aggregate of form and three other mental aggregates. That is feelings, perception, mental formations. Those three are all the activity of mind. It's the manipulation of objects and the reaction to objects. But now we're looking at consciousness itself, the purely subjective aspect of mind, that which knows. In Thai forest tradition, they sometimes use the phrase puru, the one who knows. And when we say know, we don't mean in the sense of understanding, like you say, you know French or you know calculus. We're talking about know in the sense of much simpler, much more immediate sense of uh, experiencing, having an experience. And this is the quintessence of existence, the knowing mind. And I think it it's talking about consciousness or chitta vinyana. Um, it can seem difficult or subtle, abstract. But if it is difficult to understand, it's not because it's complicated, but because it's so ultimately simple. With the other aggregates, particularly with mental formations, it might be possible to reduce them to algorithms. And this is basically being done more and more with AI. We can mimic the thought process of human beings with and have conversations with a AI chatbot. But the AI chatbot is not conscious. Now, it's the one thing that cannot be replicated because it cannot be reduced to an algorithm. There simply is the knowing. I think it becomes difficult, a stumbling block, let's say a stumbling block to understanding the topic is baked into our language. And it doesn't matter whether you're speaking English or French or Thai or Pali or whatever language you might be using. We refer to consciousness as a noun, using a noun. And this is subtly misleading because it isn't a thing. There's nothing that we can point to and say this is consciousness. There simply is knowing. It's a verb. There is experiencing, but there's no thing or no one experiencing. And and this is the actual essence of our existence, the simple knowing. Everything else is uh, auxiliary to that. Also, because it's essentially subjective, it is the subjective aspect of mind. That there's no way you can know it. You can't know the knowing. You can't turn the mind around in on itself. A rough metaphor would be you can never see your own face. You can see a reflection of your face in the mirror or a photograph of your face, but you cannot see your face directly. Likewise, you cannot experience the chitta, because the chitta is that which is doing the experiencing. And if you try and look at it, you're only seeing an image of it, a thought conception about it. It cannot itself be uh, within the range of itself. Now, there are a number of theoretical issues that are raised. Uh, First of all, in the scheme of the five aggregates, the khandha that we're focusing on here, the word used is Vinnāna. Now, that's derived ultimately from the verb janati, to know. And it has the prefix V, which means to, as a meaning of like bisecting or cutting. So you can say it's to know in no particulars. The other word that's used for consciousness is chitta, and that's used more often in Abhidhamma. You have in the Abhidhamma scheme that divides the pie differently. Instead of the five aggregates, we have the four fundamentals, which are body, chitta, chittasika, and nibbana. Chitta is consciousness, and chittasika, which the word literally means associate of chitta, are those mental factors that are not chitta. So in the five khandha, that would be feeling, perception, mental formations. So there's a fundamental distinction made in Abhidhamma between the two sides or two aspects of mind, the knowing and the known, the subject and the object. And I think this the Abhidhamma scheme points that out very, very starkly, that there is this the two sides or aspects of mind. Now, the word chitta seldom occurs in the suttas, except as part of a compound. A couple of places where it does occur. One in the Anguttara Nikaya, in the Book of Ones, there's a very unusual short statement. The chitta is inherently luminous. Basara, the chitta is inherently luminous. I think it's pabasara in that case, but the same idea. And then we have, of course, in the Satipatthana Sutta, one of the four Satipatthanas is chitta. So that's one of the four bases of mindfulness. Now that seems to be a difficulty because, as I said, the conscious awareness cannot be aware of itself. It's a self-referential kind of a loop. But when you read the expansion clauses in the Satipatthana Sutta for Chittanusati, mindfulness of the chitta, it's really the associated mood or state that goes along with chitta, because the list is something like mind with desire, mind without desire, mind with anger, mind without anger, contracted mind, expanded mind, and so on. So it's not really looking at chitta directly, but at the associates again of chitta. Just as a small digression or side note here, one time years and years ago, I went to a lecture by a Tibetan Rinpoche, which was a very interesting talk that he gave. And Dzogchen was not the theme of the talk, but he did touch on it. And he said the whole idea of Dzogchen is looking at consciousness itself. And I didn't feel like in the public arena there, I didn't feel like it would be politically wise to challenge, as a Theravada monk, to challenge a Tibetan Rinpoche on a point of Dhamma. But it piqued my curiosity, so I talked to him after, one-to-one in private, and asked him, you told us that we should look at the knowing mind. Is that even possible? And he kind of hemmed and hawed and talked around the issue for a bit. Then he finally said, actually, no, it's not possible, but it's a very good exercise to try. And I thought that was very interesting. So that's a little just a personal anecdote. Getting back to the relationship between chitta and Vinnāna, that's something that needs to be clarified. I think that they're sort of synonyms, but not quite. I know in the really valuable short book, The Buddhist Dictionary by Nyanataloka, he says that they're synonyms, but I don't quite agree. I think there's a subtle difference between them. That the first approach would be to say that chitta is consciousness per se, or consciousness in the abstract, and Vinnāna is the applied or practical realization or activation of consciousness in the mind stream. So we have the use of Vinnāna in the Sutta Pitaka, which is used much more than chitta. Chitta is, as I said, quite rare in the Sutta Pitaka. Vinnāna comes in here is the five aggregate, one of the five aggregates. It comes in discussions about the sense bases, where there's, for each sense, there is a physical organ, an object, and a consciousness, or a Vinnāna. So there's, for the eye, there's eye, chaku, eye object, dhamma, and eye consciousness, or eye object, I should say, rupa, and eye consciousness, chaku Vinnāna. So there's, by this reckoning, there's 6 Vinnānas, 6 kinds of Vinnāna, as they operate through the 6 senses. We also have a problem, or a theoretical issue around the strictly defined use of chitta in the Abhidhamma, and the way chitta is used in the forest tradition, which is at first look, it looks quite different. It even seems contradictory. In the Abhidhamma, we talk about consciousness as occurring as a momentary thing. Like there's a chitta, a particularly unique chitta arises in each moment that will be associated with a different retinue of chittasakas. and will take its own special, unique object. And it only persists for a moment, and then in the next moment, there will be a new chitta arising in the series. In the way that Ajahn Mun and Ajahn Mahabua particularly talk about chitta, this sense of the momentary arising and falling away for the chitta is not really mentioned. It falls away, and the chitta is seen as a kind of a persistent reality. That there, Ajahn Mun, even I think he goes the furthest. That we have very little direct record of Ajahn Mun's teachings. We have mostly Ajahn Mahabua's talks preserved, and he was a close disciple of Ajahn Mun. But we do have a one long poem written by Ajahn Mun, and there's a lot of it's about the chitta, and he calls it the chitta outside the five aggregates. Outside the five aggregates, and that's considered by many interpreters as being kind of heretical. It's because it's not the way the Abhidhamma or Visuddhimagga or even the suttas talk about chitta. But I don't think that two positions are really as far apart as they appear. I think you could say that there are two different ways of looking at the same phenomena. If we're examining things through the lens of a time-based series, then chitta is momentary. It arises, takes an object, and falls away. But if we're examining things from the point of view of chitta itself, there's always a chitta arising. So it doesn't seem, and since it always has the characteristics of being void and luminous, there's not really anything to distinguish one chitta from the other, in the metaphysical sense. There's also, I would say, a kind of a third position that I'll just put out there as a kind of a possible speculative reconciliation of these two. And I think this is the way that the Sarvastivadins understood the chitta. At least this is my interpretation, let's say, of what I know of what the Sarvastivadins taught about chitta. The Sarvastivadin school, very important early school of Buddhism, their name means all exists because their principal distinctive teaching was that past, present, and future all exist simultaneously. That time is an illusion. All exists. Sarva Vastavada. Sarva Asti Vada. Right. So, in their view, the chitta does exist for only a moment, as in the Theravada Abhidhamma, but that moment is outside of time. It's a timeless moment. It's a kaliko. And the Chittasakas and the Dhammas and everything else in the universe arises in the future and streams backwards in time into the past. And when it crosses the threshold of the chitta, we experience it as the present. And in each moment, then, chitta is taking a new retinue of chittasakas and is taking a new object. But the chitta itself only exists in this one special moment. But this moment is outside of time. Time like time is like space in the sense that they are constructs of measurement without any real fundamental reality. So those are some comments relating to the kind of metaphysical background of Chitta and Vinnāna. But let's before we end, we should kind of go back to the first principles and look at Vinnāna in the context of the five aggregates. Vinnāna, the metaphor used for Vinnāna is a magician's trick, conjuring trick. It's like pulling a rabbit out of the hat. Because Vinnāna, in a sense, by knowing, it actually creates reality. This is the reality that we experience. Is always mediated through Chitta, through Vinnāna. You can compare that to modern theories that in physics, the observer effect in quantum mechanics, that it is the observer that creates discrete reality, and whatever metaphysical status we want to assign to external reality is in a sense it's beside the point, and it's something that can never be settled, because the only thing we ever really experience is our own mind. Everything outside of us is mediated through the mind, and the first contact is through Vinnāna. Then Vinnāna experiences the object, and then perception perceives it, and feeling or Vedana reacts to it, and Sankara thinks about it. So, let's just take a random kind of example. Let's say I look out the window and I see a bird. Vinnāna doesn't see a bird, actually. Vinnāna, eye consciousness, only sees color and shape. It knowing at that very primitive level. It's, as I said, it's not knowing in the sense of understanding. It's knowing in the sense of experiencing. So it knows color and shape. Ear consciousness knows pitch and volume, right? So each sense just has this kind of raw data that comes in from the universe. So I see this patch of color and shape, and then perception recognizes it instantaneously, very quickly. So it's very hard to separate consciousness from perception. Perception knows it's a bird. It perceives a bird, and it maybe names it as a blue jay. So it might be a very specific perception. But then that's the object. Now the perceived bird is now a mind consciousness object. And that object is then reacted to by Vedana. Maybe I like blue jays. So then I have a mild, pleasant feeling arise. And then then the mind passes all that complex on, and perhaps it's dropped at that point. If it's something trivial, I let it go. But sometimes then Sankara will pick it up and spin more around it. I might think, gee, there's a lot of blue jays this year. This kind of further speculation and definition on the perceived object. But the first contact is through the lens of Vinnāna, which perceives through the five physical senses and the mind sense. So our thoughts, for example, are not consciousness. They're objects of consciousness. They're the activity of sankharas, of vitakka vichara. And Vinnāna knows them and takes them as an object. So the idea of the Thai forest approach, I think the central theme of practice in the Thai forest tradition is sometimes been called "be the knowing," because if you are centered center your being on that faculty of chitta, then everything else becomes clear. And if you don't center in the chitta, then you're identifying with the objects of consciousness. Then you get caught up, confused, and you're caught in desire and aversion and confusion. So I'll stop there, and we'll have a look at the chat to see what questions we have. I see it's been pretty busy already. See, I gotta expand this. I can't read that tiny print. Somebody asked, the first question looks like, could you please recommend some books or authors who write in response of scientific determinism, materialistic worldview? Yes, I'm trying to remember the name. There's one author. There's one author in particular. Let me see if I can find it in. Just going to do a search for what I think the title is. Yeah, I wish I could remember his name. Oh yeah, here it is. Bernardo Kastrup. I'll type that into the chat. The idea of the world. He's a modern philosopher of mind who takes an idealist position, which is not quite the same as the Theravada view, but it's definitely a critique of materialism. His critique of materialism is excellent. Somebody says it's nice that it's this time and not later because it's an hour to midnight for me. Yeah, it's a problem of living on a round planet. We can't find a time that's convenient for everyone. Let's see. Also, okay, comment here. Also, AI can translate a biological brain. We just have not done it yet. The brain working itself proves it's logically impossible. Brain equals Turing, complete machine. I have a fundamental disagreement with that idea that we can just duplicate a biological brain and it'll be conscious. I think there's more to it than that. I don't think consciousness arises in the brain. I think the brain probably mediates consciousness. It's a whole nother topic of the mind body problem. But I think a better analogy for the relationship between mind and brain, it's not like the brain is a computer producing mind. It's like a radio receiver mediating mind. but that's a whole another kettle of fish. If consciousness is conditioned phenomena, how could know or experience nibbana, the unconditioned? Um, I think when you get to the point of experiencing nibbana, the subject object um, dichotomy or duality no longer really applies. So we can't really explain or know how that would work. Uh, I'm not. I'm not sure. I don't understand this comment. I don't think it is. I don't know what he's referring to. If it were not, animals would not exist in any form. So I'm not sure about that. What he means by that. Can you talk about neutral emotions and how they relate to ignorance? Um, well, neutral are neither pleasure nor pain. Um, is the is a Vedana. It's not an absence of Vedana. It's a reaction, a neutral reaction to the object that can be. It's probably for most people, most of the time, it's probably the most common reaction. Like we're not really moved to pleasure or pain by most things. Um, so obviously, it's not. It's peaceful, but it's not exciting. So if you're not mindful, if you're not mindful of neutral objects, then you begin to lose the thread, and that leads to confusion because the mind wanders. Whereas strongly pleasurable or strongly painful phenomena, they attract the mind strongly just by their own nature. Is Ajahn Sumedho's sound of silence an unorthodox teaching? He essentially views the knowing or noticing of consciousness as the unconditioned. Um, I think it's. I don't know if you call it unorthodox. It's. I guess by the standard of the whole Thai forest tradition, by the standard of the strict Abhidhamma school, is considered unorthodox in a way, because it's based on experience rather than on theory, and so it kind of upsets the literally minded. But I think Ajahn Sumedho's teachings are quite profound. I think that they're worth studying. Are the Lokuttara Chittas maintained after Parinibbana and continue to experience Nibbana as the object? I keep telling everybody, don't get in. Try to avoid getting into speculations about Nibbana, and because it's really quite useless and fruitless. It becomes just playing with words, because Nibbana is beyond expression. It's beyond words. So most of these questions are really meaningless. Can you explain resistance and designation aspect of thoughts? Um, I'm not quite sure what you mean, resistance and designation. I can speculate. Possibility of what it might mean. Our thoughts are a way of manipulating mental objects, and they can have, and they usually do have some reference, which might be rather indirect, but they'll have some reference to sense objects in the external world. And resistance would be, using thought to avoid or deny some aspect of reality. Designation, I would say, is more analytic, like trying to make sense of the perceived objects. Uh, does I have a question? Does the consciousness arise at the sense-object contact moment, or does it arise as a condition of all first four aggregates? No, consciousness arises. The former consciousness, I would say, arises at the moment of sense-object contact, and then the other aggregates come in very quickly afterwards. Can you know chitta when chitta goes from distracted to aware? Well, you know you know that mind is now uh, uh, awake, right? And this is actually an important point of practice, that um, that moment, like say you're when you're meditating and you've wandered off and you're daydreaming, then the mind snaps back to the practice. That moment is a moment of a bodhi, it's a moment of awakening, and you should be clearly aware of that and how that feels. That's kind of important. If consciousness continues after death, then why did Buddha characterize consciousness as one of the five aggregates of clinging? Well, it does. Consciousness doesn't transmigrate from life to life. And the Buddha was quite clear about that. Consciousness arises again, this is the momentary aspect of Vinnāna, right? That in each moment, mind is arising to take an object. And the only difference at the moment of death is that the physical base has fallen away. So the next moment when it arises, it has to arise in a new stream of a new physical base. So it's not a break in the continuum, but it's not anything substantial transferring from life to life. Remember that Vinnāna or chitta is essentially void. There's nothing there, so there's nothing to transfer from life to life. Okay. Do you think consciousness could be a dimension of its own, like space and time? Then we live basically in the space-time consciousness continuum. That's a possible model that I don't see a problem with that. Um, and I think that would be basically the expressed in different language, expressed in modernized language, but I think that's basically the Sarvastivada position. The consciousness is separate from space and time. Uh, it doesn't really it cannot be measured in terms of space and time. What is knowing the chitta nimitta in the simile of the chef? Uh, I don't know. I'm not aware of what simile you're referring to. Is sati therefore chitasaka sankhara kanda? Now, sati is classified as a chitasaka. Is sankhara aggregate the reason thoughts arise? I find myself often lost in thought. Yes, I would say that it's the what's the sankhara aggregate that does the thinking, particularly vitakka vichara, but it's following desire and so on. Do you support the 969 movement in Burma? No, I do not. Uh, is something that is outside of dimensions of space and time, everywhere, nowhere, and exists all the time and doesn't exist at any time simultaneously, like an infinite sea of all possibilities ever. Uh, yeah, I think that's sunyata. So, the emptiness, the great void, is because it's absolutely empty. It has an absolutely infinite possibility. Okay, you should check out M theory dimensionality. I've never heard of that. Do you think the difference between Buddhism and other Indian ascetic tradition is just how they explain things, or are their practices actually different? For example, I've read Jain and Upanishadic texts that talk about having no desires, ending rebirth, etc. Yeah, I think there's a very big overlap um, between Upanishadic Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism, but I don't think they agree on everything. And I think it does have some reflection in the practice. I would say, for example, with the Jains, they have the idea of uh, eroding your old karma, gaining liberation by getting rid of your old karma, uh, by not making any new karma. So one of the highest practices in Jainism is just to starve yourself to death, not to do anything. Well, that would be completely wrong practice in the Buddhist view. Is there any difference between or I'm not sure what that word is. I think it was a typo there. Oh, ear. I guess it means ear consciousness. Is there any difference between ear consciousness and sight consciousness other than what they take as objects? Can consciousness ever be separated from its object? No, I don't think you can ever have consciousness without an object. Um, uh, it's sort of defined by the taking of an object. Um, I don't think there's any real, let's say, basic level difference between ear and eye consciousness, but just that they're operating through different doors, but they're still just consciousness. And there are people. It's called synesthesia. I talked to someone who had this. It's kind of a neurological um, divergency where they mix up sight and sound, and it's not in any way a hindrance. They still function perfectly well in the world. But this woman who had this, she told me that like when she listens to music, she hears the sounds and sees colors. It causes in her, the sound actually plays back into her um, eye consciousness and produces colors. Is every moment conditioned by clinging? Every moment is until you're fully enlightened. Yes. I was talking about Sunyata 47.8, some of the chef. I'd have to look that up. I don't recall that at the moment. What the context is. So for an arahant, is there clinging in every moment? No, arahant is beyond clinging. But for everyone else, there will be some clinging that causes the mind to take an object. Okay, so I think I'll stop there, and next week we'll meet again at the same time, and I'll come up with something to talk about. I think we have. Let me just look at the calendar. We've got two more Thursdays in March. In April, I'm taking off. I'm doing a retreat for a month, so there'll be no live streams in April, and I'll pick it up again in May. So thank you all for coming. I hope you got something out of it, and we'll see you again.